He gave up his seat without hesitation, just a quiet, single dad trying to ease the fears of two crying little girls on a crowded plane. He had no idea who their mother was, and certainly no clue that his simple act of kindness would change the rest of his life. If stories of love, second chances, and the quiet power of goodness speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe. We share true-to-life tales that stay with you long after the final word is spoken. Now let's begin. This is the story of the seat that changed everything. Luke Whitaker had never flown on a plane before. In fact, he could count on one hand the number of times he'd left the Oregon mountain town where he was born, fell in love, buried his wife, and started raising their daughter alone. The town of Redford Ridge was stitched together with pine trees, rusted mailboxes, and coffee shops, where everybody still paid in cash. People there didn't go places. They stayed, especially men like Luke. Quiet, calloused, dependable. But when the envelope arrived, creased and coffee-stained like everything else in his life, he almost tossed it, thinking it was another overdue notice. Instead, it was a letter from a woman named Nora Hastings, head of community affairs at Langston Airlines. Mr. Whitaker, we recently heard of your heroic actions, saving an elderly man from a burning vehicle outside Redford Ridge Elementary. Please accept this complimentary first-class ticket to any destination in the continental U.S. As a small thank you for your courage. He stared at the words for a long time, then blinked down at the single plane ticket enclosed Portland to New York City first class. It didn't feel real. Ruby, his 9-year-old daughter with hair like wildfire and questions that never stopped, nearly squealed herself off the kitchen chair when he told her, "Daddy, that's like the Sky's VIP section." Luke laughed. Guess they want me to fly fancy while still wearing this old flannel. He ruffled her hair, then glanced at the worn Polaroid of their little family taped above the sink. Him, his late wife, Anna, and Ruby as a baby. It had been 4 years since the accident. Luke hadn't taken a real breath since. But something about this trip, this strange free ticket to the unknown, felt like maybe the world was opening a window. He packed light one change of clothes, a paperback Western, and a tin lunchbox with Ruby's drawing taped on top. She'd colored it just that morning. Dad's plane adventure, don't forget snacks. She'd drawn a stick figure man in a pilot hat riding a flying tractor. Luke smiled all the way through TSA. The airport was louder than anything he'd ever experienced. Business people rushed by with phones in their ears. Kids cried in strollers, and everything smelled faintly like cinnamon and bleach. Luke clutched his boarding pass, feeling like a rodeo horse let loose in a shopping mall. First time flying, a gate agent asked as he showed his ticket. "That obvious," he said with a crooked grin. The agent chuckled. "Welcome to the skies, Mr. Whitaker." First class is through that door. He stepped inside the plane, blinking at the plush leather seats, the soft music, and a man in a 3-piece suit sipping orange juice from a glass that looked too fragile for real people. Luke found his seat 1A and sat stiffly holding his lunchbox, like a briefcase full of secrets. He was still adjusting the armrest when he heard it. Crying, he turned and saw them 2 little girls, identical, maybe 5 or 6, with matching red bows in their blonde curls. One was tugging at a flight attendant's sleeve, tears streaking her cheeks. The other was seated several rows back, arms flailing, clearly frightened. "They're twins," the attendant whispered to Luke. "We accidentally split them up. There's just no room to seat them together." Luke stood without thinking. "Put 'em here," he said, motioning to his seat. "I'll sit wherever." The attendant blinked. "Sir, this is first class. You don't have to. It's just a seat. They're kids." The next 15 minutes became the kind of memory people tell strangers about. Luke didn't just give up his seat. He knelt down and tied the girls' shoelaces, pulled 2 oatmeal cookies from his tin lunchbox, and introduced himself as Captain Flannel, Sky Bunny of Seat 1A. The girls giggled through their sniffles. "You have bunny ears," one asked. Luke whipped off his mask, twisted the ear loops into loops above his head, and whispered, "Only when the clouds are watching." The entire first-class cabin was now paying attention. He helped the girls climb into the big seat, buckled them in, and gave them a solemn look. "This chair is magic," he said, "but it only works if you sit still. If you bounce it, toots." Their eyes widened. "It toots loudly." And everyone will know, the cabin erupted in laughter. Luke ended up in a seat in the very last row next to a lavatory that smelled like disinfectant, and defeated he didn't mind. He sat with his knees cramped, reading his old Western thinking of Ruby, and the way she'd said, "Maybe the world wants to thank you back, Daddy." He didn't know that just 3 rows behind the twins sat Audrey Sinclair, their mother and CEO of Langston Airlines. And she had seen everything. Audrey Sinclair had always thought she knew what to expect on a flight. As CEO of Langston Airlines, she'd flown more miles than she cared to count across continents and time zones, in boardrooms and bunkers. She could recite FAA regulations better than her company's lawyers. But none of that had prepared her for the sight of her 5-year-old twins. Ellie and Lila, the light of her life, sobbing on opposite ends of the cabin, like 2 puzzle pieces ripped apart. She had boarded late after a tense video call in the airport lounge. She'd told the girls to follow the flight attendant, assuming the staff would seat them together, as always. But there was a mix-up. One twin ended up in row 5A, the other in row 18C. By the time she reached her seat, Lila was already wailing, and Ellie was shaking in silence, her arms crossed tightly, as if shielding herself from the unfamiliar world. Audrey rose from her seat to intervene, but before she could speak, a man in a worn flannel shirt, one of those first-class passengers she usually never noticed, stood up without hesitation. "Put him here," he said. "I'll sit wherever." He didn't ask for thanks, didn't look for approval, just acted. And then the unbelievable happened. She watched through the gap between the seats as this stranger got down on one knee to tie her daughter's shoes, offered them cookies like an uncle on Christmas morning, and made them laugh louder than they'd laughed in weeks. He wore his mask like bunny ears, told them their new seat could toot if they didn't sit still. The whole cabin was in stitches. Even the uptight man in 1B cracked a smile. But Audrey, she just sat frozen. Not because she was embarrassed or confused, but because she hadn't seen anyone be that good to her kids without expecting something in return in a very, very long time. She watched him disappear to the back of the plane. No one thanked him. He didn't wait for applause. He just folded himself into a seat near the bathroom like it was the most natural thing in the world. Who gives up first class for 2 strangers' kids and makes it look like a game? She thought. The answer hovered in her mind. Someone who's lived through things money can't fix. The flight passed uneventfully after that, if you didn't count the part where the twins made up an entire Captain Flannel song and sang it to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Audrey gently hushed them, but inside she was smiling too and wondering. After they landed, Audrey waited until the crowd cleared. She had the girls' hands in hers as they stepped onto the jet bridge, scanning the crowd for the man in flannel. But he was already gone. "Mommy, where did Captain Flannel go?" Ellie asked. "I wanted to give him my lollipop," Lila said, holding it up like a peace offering that missed its war. Audrey bent down, brushing their hair back gently. Maybe he had somewhere important to be, but something tugged at her. Not quite guilt, not quite curiosity. Something achingly human. She was about to turn away when one of the flight attendants caught her arm. "Ma'am," the woman said softly, glancing at the children. I just wanted to say, those girls are lucky. That man, he didn't even blink. Just gave them his seat like he does it every day. Audrey swallowed. Do you know his name? The woman thought for a second. Whitaker. Luke Whitaker. That's what it said on his boarding pass. Audrey nodded slowly, the name etched into her like a signature. Later that night, as the girls drifted off in their hotel room, twin beds pulled close together, the lollipop uneaten on the nightstand. Audrey sat by the window, her laptop open, but forgotten. She searched his name. There wasn't much, a few mentions in a local paper. Local man pulls elderly driver from burning car. No social media, no LinkedIn, no trail. She leaned back and stared out at the skyline. What kind of man gives up comfort, makes kids laugh, and walks away like it's nothing? Someone who doesn't know his worth, she thought. Or maybe someone who's been told his kindness is only ever background noise. She didn't like that. She didn't like that. Luke Whitaker might go home thinking what he did on that plane was small, because to her, it changed everything. Audrey Sinclair had spent the better part of her adult life behind boardroom tables, curtain walls, and layers of carefully managed image. She had learned early in her career that vulnerability wasn't an asset, especially not in aviation, a world still dominated by men in tailored suits who confused compassion for weakness. But something about Luke Whitaker, a stranger in a flannel shirt and work boots, who gave up comfort without blinking, had torn a quiet seam in her armor, the kind that didn't hurt, the kind that let in light. She hadn't planned to see him again. Most acts of kindness ended that way, anonymous, unrecorded, and unreturned. But that night in her hotel room, she kept glancing at the slip of paper where she'd scribbled his name. She still had access to internal flight manifests, of course. A perk of being the CEO, even if she rarely used it. But now, she gave herself permission. Flight 218, Portland to JFK passenger. Luke Whitaker, seat changed from 1A to 28E mid-flight, return flight. None booked. Her eyes narrowed slightly. No hotel reservation under his name. No rental car. Just a man who came to the city and disappeared. The next morning, while Ellie and Lila played with their breakfast pancakes, Audrey pulled up a news article she'd found late last night. Mechanic rescues elderly man trapped in burning vehicle. Photo quality was grainy, but she recognized that same weather-worn flannel and those watchful blue eyes. The article described how Luke had been picking Ruby up from school when the crash happened. He'd smashed a window with his elbow, pulled the driver out just seconds before the engine burst into flames. Refused medical attention, quietly walked away. He didn't even stay to get his name in the paper, one witness said. Just checked if the guy was breathing and left. Audrey felt her throat tighten. Who was this man? And why did he make the world feel simpler just by walking into it? That evening, she took the girls to Central Park. They rented a rowboat, something she hadn't done since before the divorce. Lila giggled every time the oar splashed too hard, and Ellie insisted she was the captain. As Audrey sat back watching them float beneath the trees, her mind drifted again to Luke. He had the kind of kindness no resume could capture, and no amount of money could buy. The kind that sat quietly in people like a low-burning fire, keeping them warm, even when no one noticed. She'd spent years trying to teach her employees to go above and beyond in customer service. Luke Whitaker had done it in 5 minutes, with bunny ears made from a mask and a cookie from a tin lunchbox. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Audrey picked up her phone and sent a message to her chief of staff. Do a discreet search. I want to know where Luke Whitaker lives. Find contact information, but don't reach out yet. Keep it private. Then she sat back and stared out the hotel window, watching city lights blink like distant fireflies. Her reflection looked tired, not from work, but from years of keeping people out. Luke hadn't just helped her daughters. He'd made them feel safe, seen loved even for a moment. And in doing so, he'd cracked something open in Audrey she hadn't known was closed. 2 days later, she received a reply. Lives in Redford Ridge, Oregon. Runs a small auto repair garage. Widowed 1 daughter, age 9. Ruby Whitaker attends Redford Elementary. No criminal record, no debts, no social presence. Audrey read the last line again. No social presence, no noise, no show. Just a life lived quietly and well. That weekend, back home in Connecticut, she walked into her office, the one no one else entered, but her bookshelves lined with aviation history awards. She never dusted a glass case with a model of the first Langston Airlines propeller. She opened a drawer and took out a small velvet-covered box. Inside was a silver pin, a pair of wings. It had belonged to her grandfather, one of Langston's first pilots. He used to say, "The best flight paths aren't charted, they're chosen." She stared at it, then at her own reflection in the office glass. And for the first time in years, Audrey Sinclair didn't see a CEO staring back. She saw a woman who wanted to do something reckless, something kind. Back in Oregon, Luke had returned to his garage by then, grease under his nails, and no idea that his life had brushed up against something monumental. He didn't know Audrey's name, or who she was, or what she was planning, but he had left a mark on her life that no first-class ticket ever could. And she wasn't done with him yet. Luke Whitaker had no intention of being remembered. He stepped off the plane into the sweep of terminal lights and rolling luggage carts, feeling like a misplaced puzzle piece in a 1,000-piece city. The tin lunchbox rattled in his hand. Ruby's drawing was smudged, but still taped to the top. The crayon stick figure with a crooked grin labeled Dad's Plane Adventure. He smiled at it, then stuffed it into his backpack. The city air was dense with exhaust and ambition. Luke moved quietly toward the terminal exit, unaware that someone had been watching him the entire flight. Audrey Sinclair held her daughter's hands tightly as they stepped off the jet bridge. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor, her eyes scanning the sea of people ahead. He wasn't there. "Where's Captain Flannel?" Ellie asked, tugging her hand. He didn't say goodbye. Lila whispered a note of real sadness in her voice. Audrey sighed. She'd waited until the crowd cleared, hoping he'd be easy to spot. But he was already gone. No doubt slipped away like a ghost in work boots and denim. 15 minutes later, she spotted him near baggage claim standing by a vending machine, one foot crossed over the other, chewing thoughtfully on a granola bar, like he hadn't just charmed an entire cabin with bunny ears and jokes about tooting chairs. He was about to walk away when she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said. Luke turned and blinked in surprise. Then his eyes dropped to the twins who were now running toward him. "Full speed, Captain Flannel," Lila yelled, arms wide. Luke caught her in a clumsy but genuine hug, Ellie crashing into his other side. He crouched to their level and chuckled. "Hey, my co-pilots made it. No turbulence, huh?" Audrey stood a few steps back, arms crossed, half in amusement, half in awe. "I think you stole their hearts somewhere over Ohio," she said. Luke stood slowly brushing cookie crumbs off his shirt. "Well, they earned first-class behavior awards. Seat 1A's never been so well behaved." She extended a hand. Audrey Sinclair, their mother. He shook it, his grip warm and real. Luke Whitaker. There was a beat of silence, a flicker of something recognition connection. Neither of them moved. Audrey finally broke it. "I owe you dinner." Luke blinked. "Mom, you don't owe me anything." They looked scared. "I just did what any decent." "No, you didn't," she interrupted gently. "You did more than most would have, and I don't offer dinner to just anyone who makes my kids laugh. Trust me, that's a short list." Luke hesitated. Then Ellie spoke up. "We want spaghetti." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Spaghetti, huh? High-stakes cuisine," Lila added. "With meatballs. Big ones." He looked at Audrey. "I guess the jury's spoken." She gave a lopsided smile. "We're staying in Manhattan a few more days. Let us treat you just one evening. No obligations, just gratitude." Luke scratched the back of his neck. "All right, but only if you let me tell bad jokes the whole time." "Deal," she said, before she could think better of it. That night, they met at a quiet Italian bistro tucked between skyscrapers. It was nothing fancy by Audrey's standards, but the twins lit up like it was Disney World. Luke arrived in a clean, button-down, still flannel, just less oil-stained, and brought a small wrapped box. Inside was a keychain shaped like a tiny wrench. "For Ellie and Lila," he said. "So you can fix things, just like you fixed my day." Over garlic bread and laughter, the twins told story after story about their flight, embellishing every detail until it became a full-blown epic. Luke played along, adding dramatic flourishes and impersonating the captain's voice. Audrey mostly listened, watching this man so at ease with children, so completely unaware of the quiet space he was starting to fill in her life. At one point, while the girls were coloring the paper menus, she leaned in and asked softly, "Do you do this often? Give up seats. Make people feel seen." Luke's smile faltered for a second, then returned. "I try worlds noisy enough as it is. Sometimes just need someone to look you in the eye and say, 'Hey, I see you.'" She looked down at her wine glass. "That's rare. It shouldn't be," he replied simply. When dinner ended, Luke offered to walk them back to the hotel. On the way, he told the girls a bedtime story about a pair of twin raccoons who got separated in the forest and found each other by singing the same off-key song the girls sang all the way up to the elevator. At the door, Audrey turned to him. "I don't know how you did it, but you made them feel safe." Luke shrugged. Maybe that's all we're really meant to do for each other. He started to step back, but she touched his arm lightly. "If you're still in the city tomorrow, we'd love to see you again." Luke nodded, then grinned. "Well, I've still got half a granola bar and no return ticket. Guess the city's not done with me yet." He turned, walked into the New York night and disappeared, just like before. But this time, Audrey didn't feel the silence as a goodbye. She felt it as a beginning. Audrey Sinclair had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants from Paris to Tokyo. But there was something disarmingly tender about sitting in a modest Italian bistro in Lower Manhattan, watching Luke Whitaker lean across the table, wiping marinara sauce off her daughter's chin with a napkin shaped into a giraffe. Lila giggled. "You made it look like a zoo?" "Only way to clean spaghetti sauce," Luke replied. Mock serious. "You need the help of trained animals." Audrey laughed, not the kind she gave in board meetings or at networking events, but something unguarded, something real. It surprised her. So did the way her shoulders felt looser, her heartbeat, calmer just sitting across from this man in rolled-up sleeves and warm eyes. He wasn't charming in the practiced way she was used to. He was decent, and that was rarer. Later that evening, after the twins had polished off their dessert and were leaning sleepily against each other in the booth, Audrey stirred the last of her coffee and said softly, "You're good with kids." Luke shrugged almost bashfully. "I've had practice. My daughter, Ruby. She's 9, loves, spaghetti, hates math, thinks I'm the world's worst singer, and she's not wrong." Audrey smiled. "I didn't know you had a daughter. I don't usually talk about her first thing," he said, "but when I saw your girls scared on the plane, I just thought of Ruby. If she were ever alone in a crowd, I'd want someone to make her laugh or tell her seat might toot." Audrey chuckled, then looked down at her coffee. There was a pause between them, not awkward, but full, like a space waiting to be filled or maybe protected. She didn't plan to speak the next words, but they came out anyway. My ex-husband once told me I cared too much about control. He said I ran our home like a quarterly board review. Luke raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. I didn't marry for love, she continued quietly. It was convenient. Good for the family brand. He was from old airline money. I was the young, brilliant upstart. The press loved it. The company stock rose 4 points after our engagement. Luke leaned back slightly, watching her, not judging, just listening. But I never felt safe, she said. Not really. Not emotionally. And I didn't realize how badly I needed to until he left. I thought I was building a future. Turns out I was just building armor. Luke nodded slowly. Armor's good, sometimes. But if you wear it too long, it starts wearing you. Audrey looked up. There was something in his voice, something quietly weathered. What about you? She asked. Luke exhaled, gaze drifting to the window where the city blurred in gold and shadow. My wife Anna died 4 years ago. Car accident. I was under the hood of a '98 Silverado when the call came in. Ruby was 5. I didn't even know how to braid hair back then. He smiled faintly. I had to learn everything. Bedtime songs, chicken soup, how to say no to a 9-year-old with a glitter glue obsession. Audrey laughed gently, then fell quiet. I'm sorry, she said. Me too, he replied, but we're okay. Ruby's the strongest person I know. She tells me we're resilience buddies. He paused. And I guess I've learned that some people don't get the love story they expected. But maybe there's another chapter. If they're paying attention. The waiter returned with the check. Audrey reached for it automatically. Luke stopped her. You invited me, but I've got this. You gave up a first-class seat for my daughters, and they gave me a story to tell Ruby when I get home. I'm coming out ahead. She hesitated, then let him pay. It wasn't about the money. It was about letting someone be kind to her, without conditions. Outside, the city had shifted into that rare lull between rush and midnight. The streets shimmered with reflected taxi lights, and the hum of distant horns became a lullaby. They walked in silence for a while, the girls half asleep in Audrey's arms. I'd say goodnight, she said when they reached the hotel. But I think the girls already beat me to it. Luke smiled. I think Lila fell asleep somewhere around the second meatball. Audrey shifted her weight, trying not to wake them. Would you like to see them again tomorrow? He looked at her carefully. Not out of obligation, she added quickly, but because they already adore you, and because I'd like to thank you properly with fewer meatballs involved. Luke hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. Back upstairs after tucking the girls in, Audrey stood at the window for a long time. She wasn't thinking about meetings or market trends. She was thinking about a man who braided his daughter's hair, who carried cookies in a tin lunchbox, who told her the kindest thing someone could do was look another person in the eye and say, I see you. She hadn't expected him. She hadn't planned for any of this. But some things, the best things, don't arrive according to schedule. Luke Whitaker never imagined extending an invitation like that, especially not to someone like Audrey Sinclair, poised, polished, and carrying a presence. Like she was born to navigate boardrooms and international airports. But there he was, standing in front of the Manhattan hotel lobby, blurting out words that felt reckless and right all at once. If you and the girls ever get tired of skyscrapers, we've got a quiet little patch of trees and stars up in Oregon. Ruby makes a mean hot cocoa. I make a decent fire. Audrey didn't answer right away. She looked at him with that unreadable stillness he was starting to recognize. Not hesitation, but evaluation. Then she smiled. Do you have marshmallows? Jumbo, he replied. Deadpan. That settled it. 3 days later, Audrey Sinclair drove into the sleepy mountain town of Redford Ridge with 2 suitcases, 2 girls singing off-key in the back seat, and a heart pounding with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope. She'd told herself it was a detour, a spontaneous break before heading back to Connecticut. But the truth was harder to explain, maybe even impossible. It wasn't just Luke. It was what she saw in him, the space he created for others to simply be. She hadn't had that in years. Luke stood outside the garage when they pulled up, wiping grease from his hands. Ruby stood beside him in a faded flannel 3 sizes too big, and Converse that had seen better years. She held a sign painted in glitter glue. "Welcome, flight crew," the twins squealed. Audrey smiled so wide it surprised even her. Luke opened the passenger door. "Permission to board." "Granted," Audrey said. "Though I make no promises about turbulence." He grinned and helped unload the bags. The moment felt surreal. 2 worlds brushing against each other in the gravel dust of an Oregon driveway. But it didn't feel forced. Just unexpected, like a forgotten melody coming back mid-song. The cabin was tucked behind a grove of sugar pines. Modest and weathered, it leaned slightly like it had grown tired of standing perfectly straight. But the porch swing creaked with invitation, and the smell of wood smoke drifted like a promise. Inside, the air was warm and alive. Ruby led the girls to her room, proudly announcing, "You get the top bunk, but I have the lava lamp." Audrey stood in the center of the living room, eyes catching on the odd details: a shelf of Western novels worn at the spine, a hammer hanging next to the door, a hand-drawn map of local hiking trails, and a picture frame cracked in one corner of a younger Luke, holding a toddler in front of a rust-colored truck. He caught her gaze. Anna took that the summer before. "Well, before," he said quietly. "She always said I looked better when I was distracted." Audrey stepped closer. She was right. Luke laughed softly, then motioned to the kitchen. "You hungry?" Ruby's already set out her signature snack platter. We're talking cheese sticks, pretzels, and apple slices, cut into dinosaur shapes. Audrey raised an eyebrow. Gourmet Michelin's considering a 3rd star. That night, they sat on the back porch as the girls played flashlight tag in the yard. The stars above Redford Ridge were nothing like Manhattan's washed skies. Here they burned close and bright like tiny windows into something better. Luke passed Audrey a mug of hot cocoa. She sipped, then smiled. "You weren't exaggerating. This is spectacular." "Ruby's recipe," he said. "She's got a future in culinary chemistry." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the creak of the porch swing underscoring the quiet. Then Audrey asked softly, "Do you ever get lonely here?" Luke didn't answer right away. "Then yeah, sometimes, especially at first. But there's something about being needed by a kid that keeps you upright, even when you want to collapse." She nodded. "I used to think purpose came from success. Now I'm starting to think it comes from proximity, from being close enough to matter." He turned to look at her. "You've mattered to those girls since the day they were born." She hesitated. "I didn't always know how to show it. I was building so many things, companies, partnerships, an image, that I forgot to build a life." Luke didn't flinch. "Sounds like you're doing it now." Audrey looked away, only because I met someone who reminded me how. As the night deepened, Ruby brought out a ukulele, strummed 3 off-key chords, and declared it the official campfire ceremony. Lila made up lyrics. Ellie added a dance. Luke banged on a pan like a drum. Audrey laughed so hard she nearly dropped her cocoa. And in that small, lopsided cabin, something larger than coincidence began to bloom. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep in a tangle of stuffed animals and borrowed blankets, Audrey stood by the fireplace, staring at a row of family photos. One showed Ruby in a Halloween costume, some kind of cardboard airplane. Luke stood behind her, holding it steady. He hadn't let go of her once Audrey turned. "Thank you for letting us come." Luke shrugged. Wasn't a favor. Felt more like what was supposed to happen. She stepped closer. Their eyes met. Then Ruby mumbled something in her sleep, and the moment passed. But Audrey went to bed that night in the guest room with the quilt that smelled faintly of pine, thinking of a man who'd built a life with his hands, and maybe left space in it for her. Audrey Sinclair had always been the one to listen, not confess. Years of boardroom etiquette had taught her to read the room, control the narrative, and steer conversations toward safe harbors. But on her second night at the cabin, after Ruby had fallen asleep with a book on her chest, and the twins lay giggling under a quilt of stars, she felt the dam shift. She and Luke sat on the porch again, cocoa in hand, silence between them. Not awkward, not performative, just quiet, like two people who'd stopped needing to fill every space with sound. Luke glanced sideways at her. "You look different out here." She smiled faintly. "Fewer mirrors," he chuckled. But then she said softly, "Do you ever feel like you built a life that looks good from the outside? But when you open the front door, there's not much inside." Luke didn't answer right away. He just let her sit in the question. And maybe that's why she finally answered it herself. "My parents were pilots," Audrey said after a long pause. "Both of them. Met in the Air Force. I think they loved clouds more than people, or maybe they just never learned how to land." Luke listened without interruption. I was raised with charts and schedules. Achievement was the currency of affection. If I brought home a perfect report card, I got 15 minutes of attention. If I asked for hugs, I was told I was too sensitive. She exhaled, so I became the best at everything. Best grades, best internships, fastest to VP. I married the son of a board member because it made sense. He was handsome, charming, and cold, as dry ice. We looked great in photos. We were a brand. Luke nodded slowly, still quiet, but when the girls were born, she continued, voice trembling slightly. Something cracked. I remember holding Ellie minutes after delivery and thinking, she doesn't care who I am. She just needs me. It was terrifying. Did he help? Luke asked gently. My ex. She gave a bitter smile. He loved them publicly, but privately, he saw them as detours, something that diluted our upward mobility. And you? I tried to do both, be the perfect executive and the perfect mother. But one night, Ellie had a fever. I canceled a meeting, stayed home, held her through the night. My husband came in at 2 a.m., furious, not because she was sick, but because I'd missed a dinner with investors. Luke's jaw tensed. That was the first time I said the word divorce out loud. She finished. She looked up at him, unsure what she expected. Judgment, sympathy. What she got was something better. Understanding. I stayed too long too, Luke said quietly. Not in marriage, but in grief. Audrey tilted her head. When Anna died, I convinced myself Ruby only needed structure. Bedtimes, chores, chopped vegetables, and early mornings. I didn't cry in front of her. Didn't show her. I was drowning, just kept the engine running. Audrey looked at him. What changed? He smiled softly. She asked me why I never sang anymore. I didn't even know she'd noticed Audrey's throat tightened. Turns out, he added, kids don't need perfect. They just need present. They sat with that thought for a while. The stars wheeled above them in slow silence, the wind playing through the pine branches like an old lullaby. Then Audrey asked, do you ever think about starting over? I mean, really starting over. Not fixing what was broken, but building something new from scratch. Luke took a sip of cocoa, then answered slowly, Every time Ruby smiles without worrying, I'll disappear. That's when I think maybe we already are. Audrey blinked back something unspoken. She was a woman used to contracts and projections. But here, in this lopsided cabin, beside a man who fixed engines and carried kindness, like it was instinct, she felt seen. And maybe, just maybe safe. Later that night, Audrey sat alone by the fireplace, looking at the family photos on the mantel. Her own walls back home were lined with awards, press clippings, and architectural renderings of airports she'd helped design. Here, the frames held moments, not accomplishments. A birthday party with frosting on Luke's shirt, Ruby holding up a frog like a trophy, Anna laughing with her hair blowing across her face. Audrey reached for one and held it in her hands. The girl in the photo, the young woman she used to be, looked free. And suddenly, she didn't feel so afraid of starting over. She returned to her room, pulled out a blank page from her planner, and wrote a single line: "Stop measuring worth in outcomes." She folded it, placed it in her purse, and turned off the light. But in the darkness, the words glowed inside her like a flicker of something new. Audrey Sinclair hadn't received a handwritten letter in years. Not a business card in an envelope. Not a thank you note crafted by an assistant. A real letter, curved penmanship. Ink smudges the faint scent of childhood. It arrived in a plain envelope tucked under her breakfast plate. She found it just after the twins had dashed off with Ruby to build the greatest blanket fort in the Northern Hemisphere, leaving behind a trail of cereal crumbs and glitter. On the front, in looping purple marker, were the words, "To Ms. Audrey, from Ruby Whittaker." She opened it carefully, almost reverently. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, and at the top, in careful print, "Dear Ms. Audrey, thank you for flying with Captain Flannel Airlines. My dad doesn't know I'm writing this, but I thought you should know something. My dad is really good at fixing things. Cars, toasters, the old porch swing, but I think sometimes he forgets how to fix himself. Ever since he met you and your girls, he's been smiling different. Like from the middle, not just the edges. I hope you come back again. Or stay, because I think you help him remember who he is when no one's looking. Also, thank you for liking my cocoa. Sincerely, Ruby, age 9, future astronaut or sandwich artist." Audrey sat for a long time after reading it. Not crying, just still, like something inside her had gone suddenly quiet. Not in sorrow, but in a kind of recognition. The way a song pauses before its last verse. The way you notice you've been holding your breath without realizing. She folded the letter gently, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into her purse with the same care she'd once reserved for merger documents and billion-dollar contracts. Later that morning, she stepped into the garage where Luke was working on a red pickup. Sleeves rolled, smudges on his hands, focus in his brow. He looked up and grinned when he saw her. "Morning, boss. You need your oil changed, or just here to inspect the help?" "I'm here," she said, "because your daughter sent me a letter." Luke paused mid-turn, setting the wrench down slowly. She did. Audrey stepped closer, resting one hand on the workbench. "She said you're good at fixing things, but maybe not always yourself." Luke blinked, then let out a soft laugh. "She's not wrong," she also said. Audrey continued that you've been smiling differently lately. Luke rubbed the back of his neck, the vulnerability surfacing. "Guess I hadn't noticed." "I did," Audrey said. There was a beat of quiet between them. Then she added, "So did I." They didn't need to name what was happening. Not yet. But it was there, an understanding, like the foundation of something solid, beginning to form. Audrey reached into her purse and pulled out the folded paper she'd written nights ago. the one she wasn't sure she'd ever share. She handed it to him. Luke unfolded it and read the single sentence. "Stop measuring worth in outcomes." He looked up, eyes soft. "That's a hard one to unlearn, I know," she said. "But I think we're both ready." That afternoon, the girls built a camp headquarters in the backyard, with pillow sticks and a surprising amount of string. They declared it an embassy for the United Territories of Second Chances. Luke was appointed firewood minister. Audrey was unanimously elected Secretary of Pancakes. They laughed until their cheeks hurt. That evening, Luke and Audrey sat by the fire pit. The girls asleep inside Ruby had fallen asleep. Mid-sentence, Ellie and Lila shared a sleeping bag, arms wrapped around a stuffed moose. Someone had named Captain Snuggleboots. Audrey leaned back in her chair, watching the flames dance. "This place," she said softly, "feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years." Luke looked at her eyes, reflecting the firelight. "It is home. It just took a while for everyone to show up." She smiled. "You talk like a man who doesn't realize how rare he is." Luke shook his head. "I talk like someone who finally stopped trying to be rare and started trying to be real." Audrey didn't say anything. She just reached for his hand, and he didn't let go. Before they went inside, she paused under the porch. Light turned to him and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me who you were on that flight?" Luke looked down at their joined hands, then back up. "Because being good to someone should never depend on what they can give you back." Audrey's eyes shimmered. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. "You neither," he said. "But maybe that's the point." And just like that, something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply, like a door they hadn't noticed had been opening all along. The meadow behind Luke's cabin didn't appear in any guidebooks. It wasn't famous. It wasn't marked on local maps. But every summer, like clockwork, it transformed into something that felt like a secret, whispered by the earth itself, a place where fireflies rose from the grass in thousands, blinking and swirling like a symphony of stars learning how to dance. It was Ruby's idea. "We should take them out tonight," she said, tugging at her dad's flannel sleeve after dinner. "Ellie and Lila haven't seen fireflies before. We can make it a thing." "What kind of thing?" Luke asked, rinsing plates in the kitchen sink. "A memory," she said simply. So just after dusk, armed with jars poked with air holes, peanut butter sandwiches, and an old oil lantern, the five of them walked past the edge of the yard and into the clearing. Audrey had never seen the night look like that. She'd grown up with runways and blinking control towers, with sky as backdrop, not companion. But here in the hush of wild grass and pine silhouettes, the sky felt close enough to touch, and the fireflies blinked like they were winking just for them. Ellie and Lila shrieked with delight, darting after the flickers of gold. Ruby moved slowly with reverence, whispering things to the air, as if the fireflies could hear her thoughts. Audrey stood beside Luke, watching the scene unfold, like a dream she hadn't known she needed. Luke lit the lantern and placed it between them. Its warm glow flickered softly on their faces, casting long shadows that danced with the insects. "Ruby's right," Audrey said. "This is a memory." Luke smiled. "She's got an old soul, says things sometimes that make me wonder if I'm the parent. Or she is." Audrey glanced over at the kids. "They're healing together. You know." He followed her gaze. "I think we all are." The lantern between them pulsed with amber light, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Audrey reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "I was going to wait," she said, handing it to him. "But something about this night feels right." Luke opened it slowly. It was a drawing done in pencil, careful and precise. A cabin, 5 figures on a porch swing. Fireflies all around them. On the back, a single line. Home isn't where you land. It's who's holding the lantern when you get there. Luke looked up. You drew this. Audrey nodded. I used to sketch when I was a teenager. Architecture led me away from it. But something about this place, about you, brought it back. Luke swallowed. That might be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever handed me. Audrey's voice was quiet. Then keep it. Just then, Lila ran up. Cheeks flushed, eyes wide. Look, she held up a firefly in a jar, glowing steady like a tiny lighthouse. I named him Franklin, she announced. He's our official friendship bug, Ruby chimed in. That means you both have to make a wish. Luke raised an eyebrow. Is that legally binding? Ruby crossed her arms. Absolutely. Luke and Audrey shared a look. Part smile, part surrender, and leaned in toward the jar. Ladies first, Luke said. Audrey closed her eyes. Luke followed. In the space between breaths, with nothing but the sound of crickets and a flickering lantern between them, a promise was made. Not out loud, but real. The kids played until their legs gave out. Luke carried Lila and Ellie back, one on each shoulder, giggling sleepily. Audrey walked hand in hand with Ruby, who hummed an improvised tune about lanterns that make hearts glow. Back at the cabin, Luke tucked the twins into the guest room, while Audrey stood with Ruby in the kitchen. You know, Ruby said, her voice thoughtful. You're really good for my dad, Audrey smiled. He's pretty good for me, too. Ruby nodded, serious. He laughs more, not just the ha kind. The real kind. Audrey bent down. Can I tell you a secret? Ruby grinned. I love secrets. I haven't laughed like this in a very long time either. Ruby reached for a cookie and whispered, Then I hope you stay. Later, when the house was quiet, Luke and Audrey found themselves back on the porch, a blanket wrapped around both their shoulders. The lantern now perched on the railing. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Audrey turned to him. What would you have wished for if you had spoken it out loud? Luke looked at her eyes, searching. Then he said simply, More of this. More nights like this. She nodded. And you? Audrey exhaled slowly, to be brave enough to say yes. When it matters. Luke reached for her hand. Slow. Deliberate. Then let's both hold the lantern, he said. Just for a while, Audrey leaned into his shoulder, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she'd finally found where to land. Audrey Sinclair's name hadn't appeared in the headlines in over a week, and in the world she came from, that was the equivalent of vanishing. Her executive assistant had called twice. The board had emailed. Her chief operating officer had left a concerned voicemail saying, We respect your space, but the media's beginning to speculate. She didn't answer any of them. She was too busy pouring pancake batter shaped like stars, while Ruby critiqued the fluffiness, and Ellie and Lila conducted a syrup taste test with the seriousness of international diplomats. Luke watched from the doorway, arms crossed, smile tucked under his unshaven jaw. He didn't say it out loud, but he saw it, the change in her. She was still Audrey, sharp-eyed and quick-witted, but the edges were softer now. She didn't check her phone during meals. She laughed before thinking. She let her hair get messy and forgot about her blazer in the closet. He liked this Audrey, not because she was simpler, but because she was finally whole. Later that morning, while the girls played outside, Audrey sat on the porch with Luke and opened her laptop for the first time in days. I need to write a letter, she said. Luke raised an eyebrow. To who? To my board. Luke hesitated. You sure? No, she admitted. But I've lived a life filled with decisions made from fear. This one I want to make from love. He nodded. Want me to read it when you're done? She smiled. I want you to sit beside me while I write it." He pulled up a chair. The letter wasn't long. It didn't contain business metrics or strategic projections. It didn't name-drop partnerships or market trends. It simply said, "To the Langston Board. Effective immediately, I am stepping away from daily executive duties. I've come to believe that leadership without presence is hollow, and that I cannot lead others until I learn to lead myself with kindness. The airline will go on. Planes will fly. But for now, I choose stillness. I choose to be a mother, and maybe if the universe allows more than that. With respect and gratitude, Audrey Sinclair." She hit send. Then she closed the laptop, exhaled, and leaned into Luke's side. He kissed the top of her head without a word. News spread fast. Business blogs speculated she'd had a breakdown. A few tabloids offered salacious theories. But those who knew her best, her assistant, a few old friends, even a seasoned pilot who once watched her comfort a nervous passenger mid-flight, they simply smiled because they recognized the glow in her eyes when she appeared days later in a small-town grocery store, letting two girls argue over cereal while holding hands with a mechanic in a flannel shirt. They didn't need a press release. They just saw her finally at peace. As for Luke, he didn't care. Not in the way that people fear. He didn't care that she wasn't in charge of a Fortune 500 company anymore. He didn't care that the world had once called her aviation's youngest powerhouse, or that her resignation was trending on LinkedIn. He cared that she sat with the kids at dinner, that she asked Ruby about her dreams, that she stopped trying to carry everything alone. He cared that she was here, and that somehow she chose him. One night, about a week after the letter was sent, Luke stood in his garage cleaning tools when Audrey walked in, holding something behind her back. "You busy?" she asked. Only emotionally, she laughed. "Good. I brought something." She revealed it, a small metal plaque. Luke took it in his hands. It read, "Captain Flannel's Garage for repairs of all kinds." Below that mechanical, emotional, unexpected. Luke blinked. "You made this?" "With Ruby's help," she said. "She insists we hang it right by the door." Luke smiled, shook his head. "You're really doing this, huh? I already have," she said. Then softer. "You fixed more than my daughter's flight that day. You reminded me what it feels like to land safely in someone else's care." That night, Luke brought out a small velvet box from his desk drawer. Not a ring, not yet. Inside was his old plane ticket, the first-class one he never used. He'd laminated it. And on the back, in Ruby's handwriting, it said, "Good for one lifetime seat. Non-refundable, non-transferable." He handed it to Audrey. She looked at it, touched the edge. Then she looked at him. "I accept," she whispered. "No ceremony, no fireworks, just a man who never asked for anything, and a woman who finally gave everything that mattered." It began with a seat. One seat on a plane. One quiet man who gave up comfort for a pair of frightened girls and walked away before anyone could ask his name. And now, months later, that moment lived on, not as a headline or a headline-grabbing gesture, but as the beginning of something that neither Luke Whitaker nor Audrey Sinclair had ever expected. A life that finally felt like their own. Autumn had turned Redford Ridge into a watercolor amber leaves, fluttering through the air, the scent of pine and cider threading through every breeze. The mornings came with a hush, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside Luke's cabin, the fireplace crackled, as 5 people, no longer strangers, moved in a rhythm that only true belonging creates. Ellie and Lila now called the guest room their headquarters. Ruby had made them matching name tags, Deputy Adventure Scouts. The 3 girls had become inseparable, braiding each other's hair, staging puppet shows for bored squirrels, and drawing chalk murals that looped around the driveway Audrey. She had let the quiet take root. She baked pies. She read on the porch. She learned to replace a fan belt with one sleeve rolled higher than the other. And some evenings, she'd lean into Luke's side while Ruby read aloud and wonder how she ever thought success was a substitute for this. But it wasn't until that one morning in late October that Audrey realized just how far her journey had brought her. She had driven to the post office to drop off a package when she noticed something different inside a bulletin board near the entrance newly installed. Tacked onto it was a photograph, a simple snapshot. It showed the inside of an airplane. Two small girls curled up in first-class heads leaned together in sleep. A man in a flannel shirt crouched beside them, tying a shoelace. His face half-turned, unaware he was being photographed. Below it, someone had written, "Kindness doesn't need an audience, just someone who notices Redford Ridge honors. Wall first inductee Luke Whitaker." Audrey stared at it for a long time, not because she was surprised, but because it was the first time she saw in full what Luke looked like when he wasn't trying to be anything for anyone. Just good. That evening back at the cabin, Audrey stepped outside as the sun dropped below the treetops, the sky flushed with gold and crimson like a thank you note. Written in light, Luke was sitting on the porch swing, sanding a block of wood into what might become a birdhouse, or maybe another one of Ruby's projects. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "They put you on a wall today," she said. "Oh yeah," he smiled. "Did they spell my name right?" "They spelled it right enough." He chuckled. Then she added, "I never told you this, but the day we met, I almost stepped off that plane before it took off. I was tired, disillusioned, everything felt fake. I just wanted to be done with all of it." He turned slightly to look at her. "What stopped you?" Audrey inhaled. "Two girls who needed me. And then a man who reminded me what real looks like." Luke was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed slightly at the corners, worn from being handled. He opened it and handed it to her. It was Ruby's drawing, the one she'd taped to his lunchbox all those months ago. Dad's plane adventure, don't forget snacks. Audrey smiled, tears welling. "You kept it?" Luke nodded, because that was the day everything started to make sense again. He paused, voice softer now. "You gave me back the part of myself that wasn't just surviving." Audrey didn't speak. She just leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't orchestrated. It was just two people whole and weathered, finally choosing to stay. Weeks later, a new sign appeared at the entrance to the garage. Painted by all three girls, it read, "Welcome to the seat that changed everything. Fixes friendships and firefly nights." Available daily tourists sometimes passed through town and took pictures with it. Locals smiled as they drove by, honking once in recognition, but the ones who knew the ones who had lived the story understood the real meaning, because the truth was simple. It was never just a seat. It was a decision, a gesture, a choice to be good when no one asked. And from that choice came love, laughter, late-night cocoa, and second chances written in firefly light. Inside the cabin, under the soft hum of a lantern, three girls slept soundly. In the room next door, a man and a woman sat quietly together, not needing to say much at all. Because some stories don't need more chapters to be complete. They just need a seat, a heart open enough to give it, and someone brave enough to sit beside you for the rest of the journey. If this story touched you the way it touched us, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share a little piece of your world, because stories like these connect us, no matter the distance. And if you'd like more stories about kindness, love, and the quiet moments that change everything, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to have you here with us. Thank you truly for spending your time with this story. From our hearts to yours, we're grateful you were here